In August of 1862, on a sweltering afternoon along the James River in Tidewater, Virginia, a white physician named Dr. Horace Whitcomb stood on the front veranda of a failing tobacco plantation and said something that froze every man within earshot. "These children," he announced, his voice dry as chalk, "are medically impossible." There were 5 witnesses to the declaration. The plantation owner, Edgar Whitlow, whose land had not turned a true profit in 6 years. A Confederate cavalry officer home on medical leave, one arm still bound in linen. A Methodist minister who had baptized half the county and buried the other half. An overseer with a whip coiled at his side like a sleeping snake. And standing barefoot in the dirt below them, 2 enslaved black twins, both 11 years old. They were identical in every measurable way. Height, weight, posture. Even the faint scar beneath the left eye that neither could explain. They stood shoulder to shoulder, hands clasped, eyes forward, faces empty of fear. Dr. Whitcomb cleared his throat. They answer questions before they are asked. They speak the same words at the same moment. They know facts no child has been taught. And when one is injured, he hesitated. The other bleeds. A cicada screamed from the trees. Somewhere behind the house, a shutter banged in the heat. Whitlow laughed too loudly. Parlor tricks. Children mimic one another. You know this. The doctor shook his head. I examined them separately. Different rooms. Different questions. Identical answers. Even their pulse, he swallowed, their hearts beat at the same rhythm. When one accelerates, the other follows. The Confederate officer shifted uneasily. You are saying they are touched by the devil. I am saying nothing of the sort, Whitcomb replied. I am saying that what we are seeing does not conform to nature as we understand it. Below them, the twins lifted their heads at the exact same moment. We are not sick, they said together. The minister flinched. No one had asked them a question. What none of the men noticed, what none of them would admit later, was that the wind had died completely when the twins spoke. The Spanish moss hanging from the live oaks stilled as if listening. Even the river beyond the field seemed to pause, its muddy surface flattening into an unnatural calm. Whitlow recovered first. Enough of this, he snapped. Get them back to the quarters. The overseer reached for the boy on the left. The boy did not resist. Neither did his sister. But as the overseer's fingers closed around the child's arm, the girl's nose began to bleed. A thin red line slipped down her upper lip and dripped onto the dust. The overseer recoiled. What the hell? Dr. Whitcomb staggered back a step. I told you, he whispered. By nightfall, the story had already begun to spread, carried by servants, by field hands, by a frightened stable boy who rode into town with shaking hands and a loose tongue. By morning, white society along that stretch of Virginia was whispering a single phrase behind closed doors. The twins were not natural. What they did not know, what they could not have known, was that by December of that same year, 3 men would be dead, 1 plantation would be reduced to ash, and the twins would vanish so completely that their names would be struck from county records as if they had never existed at all. What really happened on Whitlow Plantation? What did those children know that made grown men lower their voices and lock their doors at night? And why, in a land already drowning in blood from war, did seasoned soldiers admit years later that the most terrifying thing they ever witnessed had been 2 silent children standing barefoot in the dirt, finishing each other's sentences? Before we uncover the disturbing truth behind the twins no one could explain, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your state below. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. Long before the doctor's declaration, before the war reached this quiet stretch of riverbank, to a night when the soil itself seemed to hold its breath. Because the truth of the twins did not begin in 1862. It began 11 years earlier, in the dark, in a cabin that should not have existed, with a birth that no white man ever recorded, and a secret the land tried and failed to bury. The place the county men called Whitlow Plantation did not announce itself with grandeur the way the older estates did. It did not have iron gates forged in Richmond, nor a mile-long oak drive meant to make visitors feel small. It had a warped fence line, a lane of packed clay that stayed wet for days after rain, and a main house whose white paint had begun to peel in long strips, like skin after fever. Yet the land was rich in the one thing Virginia had always produced in abundance: silence. The James River ran a half-mile east of the house, broad and brown and slow, carrying the smell of brine when the wind shifted, and the sharp rot of rivergrass when it did not. The air in August was thick enough to chew. It pressed sweat into men's collars and made horses twitch their hides like they were fighting invisible hands. Spanish moss hung from live oaks along the low ground, not like decoration but like mourning. Edgar Whitlow stood at the second-floor window after Dr. Whitcomb's announcement, watching the twins get marched back across the yard. He did not watch them like a father watched children or even like a man watched livestock. He watched them the way a gambler watched dice after a bad roll, thinking not of what they were but of what they might become. Impossibly valuable, he murmured. Behind him, his wife Lenora sat at her vanity, brushing her hair in slow, precise strokes as if control could be manufactured by repetition. She had once been a social woman, the kind who hosted picnics and played the piano in the evenings. War had shrunk her world into ledgers, ration tins, and the dull humiliation of neighbors who no longer bothered to pretend Whitlow was prosperous. "You are speaking of them as though they are silver," she said. Whitlow did not turn. "Silver does not bleed when you touch it." Lenora's brush paused. "Do not start that again." "It is already started," he replied. "The county knows. Whitcomb will not keep his mouth shut. Ministers cannot keep their mouths shut. And soldiers?" He finally looked back at her. "Soldiers have nothing but stories when they are scared." Lenora's mouth tightened. "Then send the doctor away. Send that officer away. Send everyone away. It is not complicated." Whitlow let out a small laugh, sharp as a snapped twig. "Not complicated?" He gestured toward the fields beyond the glass. Tobacco rows stood thin and patchy, leaves brown too early. "This place is dying. The war has taken the best labor and the best markets. The Confederacy takes our sons and gives us paper. The Yankees take our river towns and give us ashes. And you are telling me it is not complicated." Downstairs, the front door opened and closed. Boots crossed the hallway. The Confederate officer, Lieutenant Silas Harrow, entered without waiting for invitation as though injury granted privilege. His uniform coat hung open at the chest. His left sleeve was pinned, empty. "Whitlow," Harrow called. "Come down." Whitlow's eyes flicked to Lenora. "Do not speak to him." "I will speak to whoever walks into my house," Lenora said, standing. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the hard edge of a woman whose life had been reduced, piece, by men's decisions. Whitlow hesitated only a moment, then descended. Harrow waited in the parlor, staring at the mantel where a faded portrait of Whitlow's father looked down with permanent disapproval. The officer's face was young but weathered, as though the war had dragged sandpaper over it. He did not bother with pleasantries. "Those children," Harrow said. "Where did you get them?" Whitlow's jaw clenched. "They were born here." Harrow's gaze narrowed. "Do not insult me. Nobody is born with a preacher's cadence and a schoolboy's memory in the quarters. I watched that girl look at Whitcomb like she knew what he would say before he said it." Lenora entered behind her husband, taking the seat nearest the window. Sunlight fell across her lap, making her hands look pale and bloodless. "They are children," she said. "Whatever they are, it is not your business." Harrow turned to her, and for a moment the room held the sort of tension that came before gunfire. Then his expression softened, not with kindness but calculation. "Ma'am," he said, "I have seen men torn open by grapeshot and still beg for their mother. I have watched boys no older than 16 bite their own tongues off trying not to scream while surgeons sawed bone. And I am telling you plain, those twins made my skin crawl." Whitlow poured himself a drink from a decanter he could not afford to refill. "What do you want, Harrow?" The officer stepped closer. "I want to know if they are what the rumors say." Whitlow's eyes narrowed. "And what do the rumors say?" Harrow's voice dropped. "That they are a sign. That they can see what is coming. That they can be used." Lenora's laugh was short and bitter. "Used? Of course. Everything in this house exists to be used." Whitlow slammed his glass onto a side table. "Mind your tone." Lenora did not flinch. "Mind your delusions." Harrow watched them both like a man watching a fire spread in dry brush. He had come to a plantation expecting weakness. He had found something worse, desperation. Outside, in the slave quarters, the world was different but no less tense. The cabins sat in a line near the tree edge where the land rose slightly, enough to keep floodwater from swallowing them in spring. Smoke drifted from cook fires. The smell of cornmeal and fatback mixed with damp wood and sweat. Children played without laughter, the way they had learned to, quiet, watchful, always ready to scatter. The twins were brought into the cabin of their mother, Mara, though she was not truly their mother in the eyes of the law. She was simply the woman who had birthed them, and in Virginia that meant nothing compared to paper. Mara looked up from a bowl of herbs she was crushing. Her hands were broad, scarred, and steady. "What did they do to you?" she asked. "We are whole," the boy and girl answered at once. Mara's eyes flicked to the thin dried blood at the girl's nostril. She rose and dabbed it away with a rag. "They touched you." "They touched him," the girl said. "And I bled," the boy said. Mara's throat worked. Fear lived in her, deep and old, but she did not let it show in front of the children. She set her hands on their shoulders, one palm on each, grounding herself by grounding them. "You do not speak in front of white folks unless I tell you," she whispered. The twins stared at her, unblinking. "We spoke because the house was listening," the boy said. Mara went still. "What?" "The house," the girl repeated softly. "It listens through walls." Mara's face tightened, and in that moment the narrator could see what Mara could not say aloud. She had known for years that the plantation carried a sickness that had nothing to do with crops or war. A sickness that lived in memory and buried things. "What you know," Mara said, voice low, "you keep here." She pressed 2 fingers to the center of her chest. "Not in your mouth." The boy tilted his head. "If we keep it inside, it will grow." "And if you let it out," Mara replied, "they will kill you." The twins looked at each other, one glance perfectly matched, and something passed between them that no one else could hear. "They will try," the girl said. Mara's breath caught. "Do not say that." But even as she spoke, somewhere beyond the quarters in the main house, men were already making plans. Whitlow believed he could turn the twins into profit. Harrow believed he could turn them into prophecy. Dr. Whitcomb believed he could turn them into proof. None of them understood the simplest truth. The land had been keeping secrets long before Whitlow ever inherited it, long before Harrow ever wore gray, long before Whitcomb ever held a stethoscope to a child's chest. And the moment the twins had spoken on that veranda, the land had begun, slowly and patiently, to unearth what it had buried. 3 weeks would pass before the first real test came. And when it did, it would not be a question asked with words. It would be asked with pain. 11 years earlier, in March of 1851, the rain came down in sheets so heavy it erased the river's edge and turned the low ground into a skin of moving mud. Night pressed close to the cabins, thick with the smell of wet earth and smoke. The frogs along the bank fell silent as if someone had passed a hand over their mouths. Mara went into labor just after midnight. No bell was rung. No white woman was summoned. Births in the quarters happened when they happened, and the world did not stop for them. A neighbor woman came first, then another, and then old Hetty, whose hands shook when she was idle but steadied when there was blood. They laid Mara on a pallet near the hearth and boiled water in a blackened pot, the flames licking and snapping like they knew what was coming. The contractions were wrong. Too close. Too quiet. Mara did not scream. She did not cry out at all, and that unsettled the women more than noise would have. She stared at the rafters, jaw clenched, breath measured, as if she were listening for something beneath the pain. "Let it out," Hetty whispered. "You hold it like that, it'll turn on you." Mara shook her head. "I hear them." "Hear who?" "The ground," Mara said. "It talking." The first child came fast. Too fast. Slipped into Hetty's hands with a wet sound and did not cry. The women froze, waiting for the sharp, blessed wail that meant breath had found its way into a body. Nothing. Hetty slapped the child's back once, then again. Still nothing. The neighbor woman crossed herself and murmured a prayer she had learned from a white preacher but never trusted. Then the baby opened its eyes. What? Focused. Awake in a way no newborn should be. The women recoiled as one. Before anyone could speak, the second child followed. Same size, same weight, same smooth dark skin slick with birth. This one did cry, a thin sound that cut through the cabin like a blade. And as it cried, the first child's chest rose and it breathed. Hetty stared from one infant to the other. Lord preserve us. Mara reached out with trembling hands. Give them to me. They placed the babies against her, one on each side, and she wrapped her arms around them as if shielding them from the world she had brought them into. Her breath came in ragged pulls now, the restraint gone. They came together, she whispered, like they promised. The women exchanged looks. No one asked what she meant. Outside the rain slowed. The frogs began again, cautious at first, then loud as if relieved. A wind passed through the trees, rattling the moss. By morning, word had spread through the quarters that Mara had birthed twins. That alone would have been enough to draw whispers and sideways looks. Twins were rare. Twins were watched. Twins were blamed when crops failed or children sickened. But what none of the women said out loud, what sat heavy in their throats, was that something about that birth had felt observed. The plantation record book would later list the event in a thin, indifferent hand. Female issue. Male issue. Property increased by 2. No mention of the silence. No mention of the eyes. Mara named them Isaiah and Eliza, names pulled from scripture and memory, names that meant something to her even if they meant nothing to the ledger. She sang to them at night, low and steady, songs her own mother had sung, songs that spoke of water and crossing and rest. The twins listened. They always listened. By the time they were 3, people began to notice the first odd thing. They did not speak until late, and when they did, they spoke together. Perfectly timed. Same words. Same cadence. It was not mimicry. They did not look at each other before speaking. They did not correct or follow. They simply opened their mouths and sound came out of both of them as one. Say it again, a woman would ask. They would not. Mara tried to stop it. She scolded, separated them, made them work different tasks when she could. It did not matter. They found each other across the yard, across noise and distraction, like iron filings drawn to the same magnet. When Isaiah fell from a fence rail and split his knee, Eliza screamed and clutched her own leg, blood blooming through her dress in the same place. When Eliza burned her hand on a cooking pot, Isaiah woke that night shaking and blistered. Mara took them to Hetty in secret. You got a sickness, Hetty said after watching them a long time. Or you got a curse. Mara's voice was flat. Which one gets them killed faster? Hetty did not answer. The overseer noticed next. Overseers always did. He noticed that the twins finished tasks before others, not because they were faster, but because they seemed to know what would be asked before it was asked. He noticed they never argued. Never fought. He noticed that when one was punished, the other went quiet and pale, eyes glassy, as if absorbing a blow no one else could see. Keep them apart, he ordered Mara once. They're trouble together. She tried. God help her, she tried. But some nights she would wake and find them standing at the cabin door, staring out at the dark as if listening to a call only they could hear. What do you hear? She asked them once, her voice shaking despite herself. The old ones, Eliza said. They are tired, Isaiah said. Of what? Mara asked. Of being quiet, they answered together. What Mara did not know, what she could not know, was that the land beneath Whitlow Plantation had been used for things never written down. That before the tobacco rose, before the ledger books, before Edgar Whitlow's father ever drew breath, there had been nights when screams were pushed into the ground and prayers were cut short. The twins were born where those voices had been told to stop. And voices, once given breath again, do not go back easily. By the time Isaiah and Eliza turned 11, Mara had learned to live with fear like a second spine. She knew eyes were watching now. White eyes. Curious eyes. Hungry eyes. She also knew something else, something she never said even to herself. The twins were not learning new things. They were remembering. And memory in a place like Whitlow Plantation was the most dangerous thing of all. Edgar Whitlow had been born into a world that told him, from his first breath, that land was power and people were tools. His father had owned 3 times the acreage he did and twice the cruelty, and Edgar had learned early that weakness was a sin no ledger could forgive. But by the time the war reached Virginia like a creeping fever, Whitlow Plantation was already failing, rotting from the inside out while Edgar pretended not to smell it. He sat alone in his study the night after Lieutenant Harrow's visit, the lamp turned low, the shutters drawn tight despite the heat. Papers lay scattered across his desk. Tobacco tallies, debt notices, letters from suppliers that grew colder with each line. He ran a finger along the edge of a map of his land, stopping where the quarters were marked by a cluster of rough squares. 2 children. 2 anomalies. 2 assets he had never accounted for. They are property, he told himself quietly. Saying it out loud steadied him. Property did not frighten him. Property could be leveraged. From the hallway came the faint sound of Lenora's footsteps. She did not knock. She never did any more. You are thinking too loudly, she said, leaning against the doorframe. Whitlow did not look up. You always did hate when I thought. I hate when you gamble with lives you cannot afford to lose. That made him smile thinly. Everything here is already lost. I am merely deciding what can still be turned into something useful. Lenora crossed the room and picked up one of the papers, scanning it. You are in debt to men who would sell this house from under you if they could. And you think 2 children will save you? I think, Whitlow said carefully, that the right people pay well for what they cannot explain. She dropped the paper. They are not animals in a show. They are precisely that, he replied. The only difference is that animals do not predict storms or bleed when their sibling is struck. Lenora's face hardened. You did not see Mara's eyes when they took the children back to the quarters. You did not see what this is doing to her. Whitlow finally met her gaze. Mara is a slave. What this does to her is irrelevant. The words landed between them like a crack of bone. Lenora straightened. You were not always this man. Whitlow stood, the chair scraping loud in the quiet room. The war made me this man. The world made me this man. And those children, he stopped himself, breath tight. Those children may be the only reason this place survives another year. The next morning, Whitlow sent for Dr. Whitcomb. The physician arrived with a leather case and a look of barely concealed eagerness. He had slept poorly, his mind circling the impossible rhythms of the twins' hearts, the way their pupils dilated in unison, the way one flinched before the other was touched. Whitlow did not waste time. "I want tests," he said. "Controlled ones." Whitcomb hesitated. "They are children. They are property. I need consent." "You have it," Whitlow snapped. "From me." What Whitcomb did not say but felt keenly was relief. Curiosity had gnawed at him all night. The chance to examine something that might upend everything he knew was intoxicating. He told himself it was science. He told himself it was harmless. Men often did. They began with questions. Simple ones at first. Arithmetic. Scripture. Geography. The twins answered calmly, together, even when separated into different rooms. When Whitcomb asked Isaiah how many steps it took to reach the riverbank, Eliza answered from the other side of the house before the doctor could leave the room. Whitcomb's hands shook as he wrote. Whitlow watched from the doorway, his mind racing not with wonder but calculation. Who would pay for this? Universities? Military men? Churches? He imagined himself standing before creditors with proof in hand, imagined their disbelief turning to fear, then to negotiation. Fear was always profitable. The overseer, Caleb Rourke, did not like the tests. He stood outside the door, arms crossed, jaw tight. "They ain't right," Rourke muttered to Whitlow during a break. "You keep poking at something like that, it pokes back." Whitlow dismissed him with a wave. "Your job is to make sure they do not run." "They ain't trying to run," Rourke said. "That's what bothers me." Down in the quarters, the tension spread like a sickness. People spoke in half sentences. Mothers pulled children close. Old men stared at the ground longer than usual, as if expecting it to open. Mara felt it in her bones. She watched Isaiah and Eliza walk back from the house each day, faces composed, steps even. They never complained. They never cried. That frightened her more than screams would have. "What are they asking you?" she whispered one night as they lay on either side of her. "Things they already know," Isaiah said. "Things they are afraid to hear," Eliza added. Mara's heart pounded. "Do not answer everything." "We do not," the twins said together. She closed her eyes. "Promise me you will be quiet when it matters." There was a pause. A rare thing. "We cannot promise," Isaiah said at last. "Some questions wake things," Eliza said softly. Mara pulled them close, pressing her face into their hair, breathing them in as if memorizing the scent could protect them. Above them in the main house, Whitlow poured another drink and began writing letters. Careful ones. Discreet ones. He wrote to a man in Richmond who knew men in Charleston. He wrote to a preacher who believed signs were messages. He wrote to a surgeon attached to the Confederate Medical Corps who had once paid handsomely for curiosities from the field. He sealed each letter with wax and ambition. What Whitlow did not know, what none of them knew, was that every test, every question, every probing finger was tightening something that had been bound for a long time. The twins were not being discovered. They were being summoned. And once summoned, not all things were willing to remain contained. The test did not stay gentle. At first, Dr. Whitcomb pretended, perhaps even believed, that questions and observations were enough. He listened to the twins' lungs. He checked their pupils with a small brass lamp. He measured their fingers, their skulls, the spaces between their eyes, as though the impossible might be reduced to fractions and inches. But curiosity, when fed, became hunger. And hunger demanded proof. By the second week of September, the doctor brought instruments that did not belong in a child's presence. A thin silver lancet, a small scale for weighing drops of blood, and a notebook filled with cramped writing that looked less like science and more like a man praying with his pen. Whitlow watched it all from the doorway, calm as a banker. "Minimal," Whitcomb assured Lenora when she objected, her voice tight with disgust. "A pinprick." Lenora stood with her arms folded, eyes fixed on the twins. "You are not in a hospital, doctor. You are in a house that mistakes cruelty for intelligence." Whitcomb's mouth tightened. "Madam, I am attempting to understand a phenomenon." "A phenomenon," she repeated as if the word tasted foul. Isaiah and Eliza stood in the center of the parlor, barefoot on the polished floor. They did not fidget. They did not look to Mara, who had been forced to wait outside the door like a stray. Their faces remained composed in the peculiar stillness that made grown men feel watched. Whitcomb held Isaiah's hand. "You will feel a small sting," he said, gentler than his eyes. It is necessary. Isaiah looked up. It is not necessary. Whitcomb hesitated. For knowledge, boy. For understanding. Eliza's gaze slid to the doctor's case. You want to measure what you cannot name. Whitlow's voice cut in. Enough talk. Whitcomb pressed the lancet to Isaiah's fingertip. The sting was quick. A bead of blood welled red and bright. At the same instant, Eliza gasped, sharp, involuntary, and clutched her own hand. A bead of blood appeared on her fingertip too, perfectly matched, as though an invisible needle had punctured her skin in the same place. Lenora's breath left her in a broken sound. Whitcomb stared. Then, despite himself, he smiled, small, thrilled, terrified. My God, he whispered. Sympathetic bleeding. Rourke, the overseer, shifted by the door, fingers twitching near his whip. That ain't natural. Whitlow's eyes gleamed. No, he said softly. It is profitable. Whitcomb weighed the blood, recorded it, then repeated the prick on Eliza. Isaiah flinched and pressed his finger to the wound as if he, too, had been cut. A thin line of red slipped down his skin. Lenora turned away, jaw clenched, and for the first time in years she looked as though she might be ill. The doctor should have stopped there. Any decent man would have. But decency was not what brought Whitcomb back each day with his notebook, and it was not what kept Whitlow standing in the doorway like a guard over a treasure. They separated the twins more often. One in the pantry, one in the study. Doors closed. Voices hushed. Whitcomb asked questions rapidly, trying to catch them out, trying to force them into contradiction. Name the river beyond the eastern field. The James, Isaiah answered. The James, Eliza answered from the other room before he could finish writing. How many horses in the stable? 6, Isaiah said. 7, Eliza corrected at the same moment. Whitcomb froze. 7? Whitlow's face darkened. There are 6. A stable boy ran in minutes later, pale and sweating. Sir, there's a stray colt in the far stall. Came in during the night. We didn't notice till now. Whitlow stared at the twins as if they had personally insulted him. Lenora, watching from the hall, felt her skin prickle. The twins had not guessed. They had known. What the white men in the house refused to see was how the twins' knowledge did not behave like intelligence. It did not grow through teaching. It arrived fully formed, like a memory surfacing from deep water. And memory on a plantation was a kind of crime. In the quarters, people began to avoid Isaiah and Eliza, not out of hatred but fear of association. A young man named Reuben refused to sit near them at supper. An old woman spat into the dirt when the twins passed, muttering a prayer under her breath. Mara tried to hold the community together, but her voice had begun to fray. They are children, she told them. They bleed like you bleed. They hurt like you hurt. Reuben shook his head. I seen Eliza cry without tears, Mara. Like something inside her was crying, and her face didn't get the message. They ain't cursed, Mara insisted, though her own hands trembled. They are mine. Reuben's eyes were wide. That's what scares me. That night, Mara sat by the fire while Isaiah and Eliza lay on their pallets, staring into the dark. The cabin smelled of smoke and damp wool. The wind outside carried the distant thud of artillery practice from some far-off training ground, like a heartbeat in the hills. Tell me true, Mara whispered. What is happening to you? Isaiah's voice was quiet. They pull on us. Eliza's voice followed. Like rope. Mara's throat tightened. Who does? The house, Isaiah said. The land, Eliza said. Mara swallowed hard. What do you mean, the land? The twins turned their heads toward her at the same moment, eyes reflecting firelight. It remembers, Isaiah said. It wants speaking, Eliza said. Mara leaned forward. Speaking what? They were silent for a long time. Then Eliza whispered, almost tender. Names? Isaiah added, things done. Mara's chest tightened as if the air had grown heavy. She had heard stories, the ones older people told only at the edge of sleep, half myth and half warning, stories of fields where screams had been buried, of punishments that did not end when bodies did. Do not, she begged. Do not let it talk through you. Isaiah's gaze flicked toward the door, toward the darkness outside. It already is. And in the main house, as if the land itself had overheard, Edgar Whitlow folded another letter and sealed it. He had decided his next move. He would invite more men. Men with titles. Men with influence. Men who could turn two impossible children into salvation, or into a spectacle so profitable that even war could not ruin him. What he did not know was that every new witness would add weight to the secret, pressing down on it like a hand on a coffin lid. And coffins, when pressed too long, sometimes cracked. 3 days later, the first visitor arrived from Richmond. And Isaiah, without being told, woke before dawn and said into the darkness, "They're coming." Eliza's voice answered, as if echoing him from a distance no one else could hear. "And somebody will not leave." The man from Richmond arrived in a carriage with red wheels and no markings, the sort meant to blend into roads already crowded with military traffic. He gave his name as Mr. Calder, spoke softly, and smiled without warmth. He wore civilian clothes but carried himself with the easy authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Whitlow greeted him on the veranda as if greeting salvation. "You were discreet," Whitlow said. Calder inclined his head. "Discretion is what I am paid for." Inside, the parlor had been rearranged. Chairs were placed at careful distances. Curtains drawn. The air smelled faintly of lemon oil and sweat. Lenora stood near the window, arms crossed, already braced for what she would witness. Dr. Whitcomb hovered near the mantel, his notebook clutched like a talisman. "Where are the children?" Calder asked. Whitlow nodded toward the hallway. "Being fetched." Rourke brought them in, one hand resting on Isaiah's shoulder, the other on Eliza's. He did not squeeze, but the pressure was there, a reminder. The twins stepped forward calmly, eyes taking in the room, the men, the way Calder's gaze lingered on them not with fear but appraisal. Calder crouched so his eyes were level with theirs. "Do you know why I am here?" Isaiah answered, "Because you believe stories buy power." Eliza said, "And power buys safety." Calder's smile flickered. "Interesting." Whitlow cleared his throat. "Show him." The tests were repeated. Questions. Separation. The inevitable bleeding when one was touched. Calder observed without interruption, fingers steepled, eyes bright. "What do you want for them?" Calder asked at last. Whitlow did not hesitate. "Protection. Funding. Influence. I want this plantation secure." Calder rose slowly. "What you want," he said, "is a guarantee. Those are rare these days." Lenora stepped forward. "You will not take them." Calder regarded her mildly. "Madam, I will not take anything without an agreement." "You are discussing children like currency," she said. "You will leave." Whitlow's voice hardened. "You will be quiet." Silence fell, thick and uncomfortable. Calder glanced between husband and wife, then back to the twins. "And what do you want?" he asked them. Isaiah and Eliza exchanged a look. A long one. "To be finished," Isaiah said. "To let it speak once," Eliza added. Calder's expression sharpened. "Speak what?" They did not answer. That night, Whitlow hosted a supper he could ill afford. Candles burned low. Silverware was polished thin. Guests included Calder, Lieutenant Harrow, summoned back under pretense of curiosity, and a visiting preacher named Reverend Knox, whose sermons were known for blending scripture with spectacle. Conversation circled the war, shortages, rumors of union movements. Beneath it all ran another current, unspoken but electric. "These children," Knox said, wiping his mouth, "signs appear in times of judgment. Pharaoh had his plagues. Harrow scoffed. And prophets get shot." Calder's eyes never left the twins, who stood against the far wall, silent. "Or protected," he said. "Depending on who controls the narrative." Whitlow leaned in. "You are suggesting." "I am suggesting," Calder replied, "that knowledge is a weapon. And weapons are most effective when kept secret until the right moment." Lenora stood abruptly. "This ends tonight." Whitlow did not look at her. "Sit down." She did not. "What you are planning will destroy us," she said. "If not by God, then by men who fear what they cannot command." Calder folded his napkin. "Fear can be managed." Lenora's voice shook. "You think that because you have never been owned by it?" The twins watched her closely. Something like gratitude flickered across their faces. After supper, meetings continued in the study, voices lowered, plans sketched in half-sentences. Calder proposed transporting the twins discreetly to Richmond for further observation. Whitcomb argued for controlled experiments on site. Harrow spoke of military interest, of morale, of signs that could be turned into obedience. Whitlow listened, calculated, nodded. Down in the quarters, word spread fast. Men had been seen. Carriages. Strangers. The old fear returned, the one that came when white men gathered too quietly. Mara felt it before she heard it. She found Isaiah and Eliza by the edge of the field, staring toward the house where lamplight glowed behind shuttered windows. "They are deciding," Isaiah said. "Who owns us?" Eliza said. Mara's hands clenched. "They already think they do." Isaiah shook his head. This is different. Eliza added, they want to move us. Mara's breath hitched. When? Soon, Isaiah said. Before frost. Mara looked toward the river, mind racing. Running was impossible. Hiding was a fantasy. Confrontation would end in blood. Listen to me, she whispered fiercely. Whatever happens, you do not speak unless I tell you. You do not show them more. Isaiah's eyes softened. We cannot unhear what is calling. Eliza nodded. It gets louder when they gather. Mara pulled them close. You are not alone. They held her tightly on either side as if anchoring her. In that moment, the narrator could see what Mara could not, that the twins were not children being dragged toward danger. They were a door being forced open. Back in the study, Whitlow sealed an agreement with Calder, a temporary one full of conditions and promises that meant less than the ink they were written in. Calder would return in a week with arrangements. The twins would remain under guard. Silence would be enforced. As Calder departed, he paused on the veranda and looked back at Whitlow. You understand, he said, that once this begins, it does not end cleanly. Whitlow smiled. Nothing worth doing ever does. Calder nodded once and stepped into his carriage. The night settled heavy over Whitlow Plantation. Crickets resumed their song. The river flowed on, indifferent. But beneath the soil, something shifted, stirred by voices, by attention, by the old and dangerous act of remembering. Isaiah woke just before dawn and whispered into the dark. They are closer. Eliza's voice answered, calm and certain. And they are afraid. The nights grew restless after Calder's visit. Sleep came in fragments, broken by sounds that did not belong to the present. Wood creaking where no one walked, a low pressure in the air like thunder waiting too long to fall. Even the insects seemed uncertain, their rhythms stuttering, stopping altogether, then starting again as if correcting themselves. Isaiah and Eliza stopped sleeping at the same time. Mara noticed it first. She would wake before dawn and find one pallet empty, then the other, the fire burned down to ash. The twins stood outside the cabin, barefoot in the dew, facing the tree line where the land dipped and rose again toward the old fields. You cannot keep doing this, Mara whispered one morning, wrapping a shawl around Eliza's shoulders. Someone will see. Isaiah did not turn. They already do. Who? The ones underneath. Mara swallowed. There is nothing underneath but dirt. Eliza finally looked at her, eyes dark and steady. That is what they told you. By daylight, the twins behaved as they always had, quiet, efficient, unsettlingly calm. They worked, answered when spoken to, avoided the overseer's eye. But something had changed. Their silences stretched longer. When they did speak to each other, it was often in murmurs that stopped when anyone drew near. What they shared was not language anymore. It was knowing. The first time it became undeniable was 3 days after Calder left, when Dr. Whitcomb attempted a new test. He separated the twins farther than before. Isaiah kept in the smokehouse, Eliza placed in the upstairs guest room. Doors locked. Windows shuttered. Whitcomb stood with Eliza while Rourke remained below with Isaiah. Tell me what your brother is doing, Whitcomb said gently. Eliza closed her eyes. Her hands curled into fists. He is afraid, she said. Not of you. Whitcomb's pen hovered. Of what then? Of what is behind the smokehouse? At that exact moment, Rourke shouted from below. Whitcomb rushed to the window. Rourke stood rigid in the yard, whip dangling forgotten from his hand. There's bones, he called. Sticking up through the dirt back there. Like the ground spit him out. Eliza's breath quickened. It does that when it's tired of holding. Whitcomb backed away from her as if she had struck him. The smokehouse incident was officially explained as erosion. Old animal remains. Nothing more. Whitlow insisted on it, loudly, repeatedly. But that night, Harrow was summoned again, and 2 armed men were posted near the quarters. Fear had shifted shape. It was no longer the fear of rumor. It was the fear of confirmation. In the quarters, the old stories came out. Not spoken plainly, never plainly, but hinted at through pauses and looks. An elder man named Jonah, who had been brought to the plantation as a child, sat with Isaiah and Eliza one evening and stared into the fire too long. This land don't like being named, he said at last. Isaiah nodded. It remembers when it was. Eliza added, before fences. Jonah's hand trembled. You hear them too? The twins did not answer, but their silence was enough. Mara pulled Jonah aside later, her voice urgent. What are you telling them? Jonah shook his head. They ain't learnin' from me. They teachin' me. That night, Isaiah spoke first. We know where they put them, he said softly. Mara's breath caught. Put who? The women, Eliza said. The ones who screamed. Mara closed her eyes. She had never been told directly, but she had known. Everyone had known. There were places you did not dig. Places where crops failed no matter how much you prayed. Why are you seeing this now? Mara whispered. Isaiah's voice was low. Because they are listening. Eliza continued. And because the house woke them. Mara looked toward the distant shape of the main house, its windows dark. Then we must make them sleep again. The twins shook their heads in unison. It does not sleep, Isaiah said. It waits, Eliza said. By the end of the week, Whitlow's plans had hardened. Calder would return within days. The twins would be moved at night, under guard, before winter roads made travel difficult. Lenora argued until her voice failed. Whitlow did not waver. They are not leaving this land alive, Isaiah said calmly one afternoon as they worked. Mara froze. Do not say that. They will leave, Eliza corrected. But not how he thinks. Mara grabbed their arms. Listen to me. Whatever you think you know, keep it inside. Knowledge does not save us. Isaiah looked at her with something like sorrow. It already tried being quiet. That night the twins dreamed together. They stood in a field without tobacco rows, without fences. The soil was dark and rich and breathing. Figures rose from it, not whole, not broken, but waiting. Voices pressed against them, not screaming now, but humming, a sound like many breaths becoming one. Say it, the voices urged. Say us. Isaiah woke gasping. Eliza sat upright at the same moment. It is time, she said. Outside, a horse whinnied sharply. Lantern light bobbed near the main house. Men were moving earlier than planned. In the study, Whitlow signed the final paper with Calder's seal already pressed into the wax. He did not notice his hand shaking. What if they resist? Harrow asked. Whitlow's voice was flat. Then we restrain them. And if they speak? Whitcomb asked, pale. Whitlow looked up. Then we make sure no one believes them. What none of them understood, what the narrator sees clearly now, was that belief was no longer required. The land did not need witnesses anymore. It only needed a voice. And Isaiah and Eliza, standing barefoot in the dark as armed men approached, were already listening to it speak. They came for the twins before dawn, when the air was cold enough to sting and the sky still held its last stubborn stars. Lanterns moved across the yard like wandering fireflies. Boots sank into damp clay with soft, hungry sounds. Somewhere a rooster tried to crow and failed, as though even it sensed the hour was wrong for announcing anything. Caleb Rourke led them. He carried a length of rope looped over his arm and a pistol at his belt. Two other men followed, one a hired patroller from downriver, the other a thin farmhand with red-rimmed eyes who looked as though he had not slept in days. Lieutenant Harrow came last, a rifle in his good hand, his empty sleeve pinned neatly as if he meant to look respectable while doing something unforgivable. Rourke stopped at Mara's cabin and did not knock. He kicked the door hard enough to rattle the frame. Up, he barked. Now. Mara rose from her pallet in a single motion, heart already hammering. The twins were already sitting upright, calm, eyes reflecting the lantern light as if it belonged to them. No trouble, Rourke warned. His gaze slid over Mara, then fixed on Isaiah and Eliza. You two. Outside. Mara stepped between him and the children. Were you taking them? Rourke's mouth curled. To the house. Orders. Orders from who? From the man that owns you, he snapped. Move. Isaiah's voice was quiet. If we go to the house, someone will die. The patroller laughed once, nervous. Hear that? Little prophet. Eliza looked at him, not angry, not afraid, only certain. Not you, she said softly. Not first. Rourke's hand twitched near his pistol. Enough talk. Out. They stepped into the night. Cold dew slicked the grass beneath their feet. Mara followed, refusing to stay behind, though she knew her presence would not stop anything. It only meant she would witness it. As they crossed the yard, the main house loomed ahead, shutters closed like eyelids. Lanterns glowed from the study window. Edgar Whitlow watched from inside, a pale shape behind glass, his posture rigid with the strain of being a man who believed he could command the unknown. Dr. Whitcomb stood beside him, face blanched, hands clasped together as if in prayer. Lenora, in a nightgown with a shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders, hovered just behind them, eyes fixed on the children with something like grief. Whitlow met them at the front steps. You will come quietly, he told the twins as if they were capable of doing anything else. Isaiah lifted his chin. We are already quiet. Eliza added, It is the dead that are loud. Whitlow's jaw tightened. Bind them. Lenora stepped forward. Edgar, stop this. He did not look at her. Rourke. Rourke moved toward Isaiah with the rope. His hands were rough, practiced. He had tied men to posts and fences and wagon wheels. He had learned the art of restraint the way other men learned carpentry. He grabbed Isaiah's wrist. At the same instant, Eliza's shoulders jerked as though a hand had seized her. Her breath hitched. A thin trickle of blood slid from her nostril, dark in the lantern light. Rourke froze. Harrow muttered under his breath. Christ. Whitcomb stared, lips parted, the wordless awe of a man watching his own logic collapse. Rourke recovered with anger, the reflex of a man whose fear has nowhere to go but outward. He yanked Isaiah hard. Eliza stumbled, clutching her own arm, eyes squeezing shut in pain she should not have been feeling. Stop it, Lenora whispered, voice breaking. Whitlow barked, keep going? Rourke's face twisted. Witchcraft. He jerked the rope tighter, knotting Isaiah's wrists together. The twins did not scream. They did not fight. They only watched, Isaiah's gaze locked on Rourke's face as if memorizing it, Eliza's gaze drifting toward the tree line where the land fell away into shadow. You ever dig behind the smokehouse? Isaiah asked suddenly. Rourke's eyes flicked, a betrayal. Shut your mouth. You ever smell it after rain? Eliza asked, voice gentle. Like iron. Rourke lunged forward and struck Isaiah across the face. The sound was sharp, flat. A slap that carried more fury than force. Eliza's head snapped to the side at the same moment. Blood bloomed at the corner of her mouth. Lenora gasped, hands flying to her lips. Whitlow stepped back as if the air itself had turned uncertain. Harrow's grip tightened on his rifle. Rourke stared at Eliza, at the blood on her chin, and something in him shifted. Not pity. Not regret. Only the sudden realization that he had hit the wrong target and the wrong world had answered him. He raised his hand again. Do it, Whitlow said, voice brittle. You are letting children frighten you. Rourke's hand hovered, trembling. They ain't children, he hissed. Isaiah's voice was low, almost kind. You did it before. Rourke's eyes widened. What did I do? Eliza looked at him with the calm of a judge who has already read the verdict. You helped bury her. The yard seemed to tilt. Whitlow snapped. Enough. Bring them inside. But the words had already landed. The patroller shifted uneasily. The farmhand's face went pale. Harrow stared at Rourke, suddenly seeing him not as an overseer, but as a man with a past that might crawl up out of the ground. Rourke grabbed Isaiah by the rope and dragged him toward the steps. Isaiah stumbled once, caught himself, and then looked back at Mara. Just once, quick, intimate, a glance that carried a farewell without saying it. Mara surged forward. Don't you touch. Harrow blocked her with the rifle. Not pointed but present. Stay back, he warned, voice strained. For your own sake. Mara's eyes burned with hatred. There ain't no sake in this place but yours. Rourke hauled Isaiah onto the first step. Eliza followed, hands bound now too, her breathing shallow. Whitcomb moved as if to intervene, then stopped, trapped by his own cowardice. They reached the second step. Rourke's boot slipped on damp wood. He lurched forward, dragging Isaiah with him. The rope tightened abruptly. Isaiah's wrist jerked. Eliza gasped, loud, sharp. Rourke caught himself on the railing, swore, and yanked the rope in anger, trying to regain control. And in that instant, something unseen seemed to answer. A crack sounded from beneath the porch, wood stressed beyond its years. Rourke froze. Then the step under him gave way. He dropped hard, one leg plunging through rotten boards up to the knee. The fall twisted him cruelly. His head struck the edge of the railing with a dull thud that made Lenora cry out. For a heartbeat, Rourke was silent. Then he made a sound like a man trying to breathe through water. Blood ran down his temple, thick and black in the lantern glow. His eyes rolled, unfocused, and he clawed at the boards as if the porch itself were swallowing him. Whitlow rushed forward. Get him out. Harrow knelt, trying to grip Rourke's shoulders with one hand. The patroller grabbed his arms. They heaved. Rourke's body jerked once, violently, then went slack. Whitcomb pressed fingers to his neck, face tightening with dread. No, he whispered. No, he's... Whitlow stared at the dead overseer, mouth opening and closing as if searching for a command that could reverse the moment. Lenora backed away, shaking. Mara stood frozen in the yard, one hand over her mouth, eyes wide, not with surprise, but with the awful recognition of prophecy fulfilled. Isaiah looked down at Rourke's body and spoke softly, almost mournfully. He would not have left anyway. Eliza's voice followed, thin as wind through dry corn. The land kept him. And as dawn's first gray light seeped into the sky, Whitlow Plantation did what it had not done in years. It remembered itself. Rourke's death did not feel like an accident to anyone who stood there. Not to Lieutenant Harrow, whose war-battered nerves had learned the difference between chaos and intention. Not to Dr. Whitcomb, who had spent his life blaming the unexplainable on ignorance, only to watch ignorance take a man's life in a single, quiet snap. Not to Lenora, who clutched the porch post with white knuckles as if the house itself might tilt and throw her into the same hungry dark. And certainly not to Mara. She had seen men die before. Sickness. Whippings gone too far. River drownings when a boy tried to swim at night. But this was different. This was the plantation reaching up and taking what belonged to it. Whitlow stood over Rourke's body like a man staring at a ruined tool. "Get him inside," he said at last, voice hoarse. "Do not leave him out here like an animal." Harrow's jaw tightened. "He is dead." "I said get him inside," Whitlow snapped, and in the sharpness of his tone was the panic of a man trying to reassert order over something that did not care about him. They dragged the overseer's body into the entry hall, leaving a dark smear on the floorboards. Whitcomb followed, hands shaking, eyes darting to the twins as if expecting them to grin, to gloat, to reveal themselves as monsters. The twins did none of those things. They stood on the steps, wrists bound, faces still as carved wood. Only their eyes moved. Isaiah's watching Whitlow, Eliza's watching the yard, the tree line, the ground itself. Lenora stepped close enough to smell them. Smoke, damp earth, the faint metallic tang of blood. "Did you do this?" she whispered, barely audible. Isaiah looked at her with a sadness too old for an 11-year-old face. He was already falling. Eliza's voice followed, soft as a prayer. "The boards just remembered." Lenora's breath caught, and for a moment she saw what her husband refused to see. This was not a trick. It was not fraud. It was a reckoning that had been waiting patiently for years, for decades, for lifetimes. Whitlow turned on Whitcomb. "You will explain this." Whitcomb swallowed hard. "Wood rots. A step can give way. A man can strike his head." "And the timing?" Whitlow hissed. "The words. The bleeding. The damned bones behind the smokehouse." Whitcomb's eyes flicked toward the hall window where dawn light was beginning to gather. "I cannot explain what I do not understand." Whitlow's face darkened with the kind of anger that comes when a man realizes he is no longer the biggest force in the room. "Then understand it," he said, "or you will be the next thing this place swallows." Harrow, still kneeling near Rourke's body, looked up sharply. "Whitlow." Whitlow ignored him and pointed toward the twins. "Take them to the cellar. No. Lock them down there until Calder returns." Lenora stepped forward. "No." Whitlow's eyes flashed. "Do not start with me. They are children," Lenora said, voice shaking but firm. "You put them in a cellar after what just happened and you might as well put yourself in the ground with them." Whitlow's jaw clenched. "They killed Rourke." "They did not move," she shot back. "You watched it." Whitlow's lip curled. "You are defending them?" "I am defending reality," Lenora said, "which you have been avoiding for years." For a moment, Whitlow looked as though he might strike her. Then he turned away, breathing hard, and barked at Harrow. "Do it." Harrow hesitated. The officer's gaze went to the twins, then to Mara standing in the yard beyond the doorway, shoulders squared, eyes burning. He had fought men in battle. He had never known what to do with a mother's hatred. "I will escort them," Harrow said at last. "But you will not touch them again. Rourke is dead because you pushed too far." Whitlow cut him off. "Spare me your conscience. Move." They marched the twins through the hallway toward the kitchen stairs that led down into the cellar. Mara moved to follow, but the farmhand blocked her, arms out. "Stay back," he muttered, voice trembling. "Please, just stay back." Mara's eyes never left the twins. "You take them underground," she said, low and furious, "and you will wake up to something you cannot pray away." Eliza paused at the cellar door and looked back at her mother. "We are already underground," she said softly. Then Harrow pushed the door open and the smell of the cellar rolled out, cool earth, old potatoes, damp wood, and something else beneath it all, faint but unmistakable. Like blood. They locked the twins in the cellar and barred the door. Whitlow paced above it like a man circling a trap. Lenora stood in the hall, hands pressed to her mouth, listening. Whitcomb returned to the study and poured himself a drink he did not taste. Outside, dawn finally broke. And with it came the county men. Not official law. War had made official law a flexible thing, but neighbors and cousins, men who heard a rumor and could not resist the pull of it. They arrived in twos and threes, boots muddy, faces tight, pretending they came to offer condolences for the overseer's death. They came to see if the stories were true. Whitlow met them at the porch with forced calm and a smile that looked like pain. An accident, he told them. Tragic. Nothing more. But men did not come to Whitlow Plantation for accidents. They came because something had shifted in the air and everyone could feel it. One of them, an older man named Gideon Price, whose family had owned land along the James for generations, stared past Whitlow toward the smokehouse. "I heard you found bones," Price said quietly. Whitlow's smile tightened. "Old animal remains." Price did not look convinced. "That land behind the smokehouse, my granddaddy told me never to plant there." Whitlow's eyes narrowed. "Your granddaddy was a drunk." Price's gaze remained steady. He was also right more often than he was wrong. Whitlow could have ended it then, sent them away, ordered the field hands to silence, buried the bones deeper and prayed no one dug again. But the war had taught him something poisonous. When a man felt control slipping, he grasped harder. "Fine," Whitlow said suddenly, loud enough for all of them to hear. "Come look. See for yourselves. Then you can go back to your wives and tell them there is nothing to fear." Lenora's head snapped toward him. "Edgar?" He ignored her. They walked across the yard toward the smokehouse, the men forming a loose line like they were approaching a battlefield. Whitcomb followed at a distance, face pale. Harrow came too, rifle in hand, though he did not know what he was guarding against. Behind the smokehouse, the ground was disturbed where Rourke had dug the day before. Rain had softened the soil, the earth looked bruised. And there, jutting up through the mud like a finger accusing the sky, was a piece of bone. Price crouched, touched it, and hissed through his teeth. "That ain't animal." Another man knelt, digging with bare hands. More bone surfaced. The rib. A jaw. Teeth small as corn kernels. "Jesus," someone whispered. Whitlow's face stiffened. "It is old. It is nothing." But the men kept digging and the land kept giving. A skull emerged, too small for an adult, the crown cracked. Then another. And another. The bones were tangled like roots, layered in a way that spoke of haste and concealment. Whitcomb stumbled back while rising. "These are human." Harrow's voice was tight. "How many?" Price looked up, eyes shining with something that was not quite horror and not quite anger. "Enough," he said. "Enough to make this place cursed." And deep beneath the house, in the cellar, Isaiah and Eliza sat in the dark and listened to the shovels scrape the truth from the ground. Isaiah whispered, "They're opening it." Eliza's voice answered, calm and trembling all at once. "And now it will not stop." By midday the news had outpaced the river. Men rode in from neighboring farms. A wagon rolled up carrying 2 local deputies who looked ashamed to be there, as though the very act of putting on a badge in 1862 Virginia felt like pretending order still mattered. A preacher arrived with a Bible tucked under his arm like a weapon. Even women came, faces tight, skirts lifted from the mud, because bones in the soil did not stay a men's matter for long. Whitlow tried to control the scene the way he controlled everything else, with posture, volume, and denial. "Old remains," he insisted. "Probably from some fever year. Servants buried improperly. You all are making a spectacle out of nothing." Gideon Price stood with his hands stained dark from digging. He held up a small skull, delicate as a bird's nest, and the crowd went quiet in the way people went quiet in church. "Whose child was this?" Price asked. Whitlow's eyes darted. "I do not know." "Then you should," Price said. "This is your land." Whitcomb hovered near the edge of the gathering, shoulders hunched, his notebook clutched in a grip that had turned desperate. He wanted to speak, wanted to explain, to categorize, to rescue his science from the swamp of superstition. But no words came that could make a child's skull less damning. Harrow watched the faces in the crowd and understood something Whitlow did not. Fear was changing hands. It was no longer fear of the war or fear of Union raiders. It was fear of what lived under respectable floors. And fear, once it rose, demanded a sacrifice. Reverend Knox pushed forward, eyes wide and bright, voice already practiced for the sermon he knew this moment required. "This is judgment," he declared. "The Lord has uncovered what men tried to hide. Sin does not stay buried." Someone muttered, "The twins." Another voice answered quickly, louder. "It's them. Them children." The words passed through the crowd like a match through dry grass. Harrow felt his stomach turn. "Whitlow," he said under his breath, "they're turning on you." Whitlow's nostrils flared. "Let them." "I will." "You will do nothing," Harrow snapped. "They're not here for your explanations. They're here for someone to blame." Price stepped closer to Whitlow, lowering his voice. "Where are they?" Whitlow's smile returned, thin and forced. Who? The twins, Price said, and there was no curiosity in it now, only accusation. If they're the ones everyone's whispering about, bring them out. Let us see. Lenora appeared at the porch steps, pale as linen. No. Whitlow's head snapped toward her. Get inside. Lenora did not move. You have done enough. The crowd murmured again. Someone spat. Someone crossed himself. A man in a faded coat called out, Bring him out. Whitlow's face hardened. They're in my house. That is enough. But the mob did not respect ownership when ownership made them afraid. That was the hypocrisy of it. Men who defended slavery as sacred law would tear it apart the moment it inconvenienced their fear. Two men started up the porch steps. Harrow raised his rifle, not aimed but clear. Back. They hesitated, but the crowd behind them pressed forward. Lenora stepped between Harrow and the men. Stop, she pleaded. You do not know what you're doing. Reverend Knox lifted his Bible. We know exactly what we're doing. We are protecting our community from darkness. Lenora's voice trembled. The darkness is in you. Whitlow grabbed her arm. Inside. Now. Lenora yanked free, eyes blazing. You will not use me as a shield. That was when Whitlow made the mistake that sealed him. He turned toward the front door and shouted into the house. Bring them up. Now. A farmhand ran inside. Harrow grabbed Whitlow's sleeve. Edgar, if you bring them out here. Whitlow shook him off. They need to see. They need to understand this is under my control. Harrow stared at him like he was looking at a drowning man trying to drink the river. Below the house, in the cellar, Isaiah and Eliza heard the footfalls on the stairs. They heard the iron bar scrape. They felt the air shift as the door opened and daylight knifed into the dark. The farmhand, same trembling one from dawn, stood in the doorway. His eyes flicked over them like they were snakes. Come on, he whispered. Master says. Isaiah rose first. The rope still circled his wrists, though loosened enough for him to move. Eliza stood beside him, her face calm but her breathing shallow. He will regret this, Isaiah said. The farmhand swallowed. Just come. They climbed the stairs slowly. The smell of the house changed around them, polished wood, sweat, panic. Lenora met them in the hallway before the parlor, and for a moment her composure broke. She knelt, hands hovering as if wanting to touch their faces but afraid what it might mean. I am sorry, she whispered. Eliza looked at her gently. You are late. Lenora flinched as if struck. They reached the front door. The crowd's murmur rose into a single hungry sound when the twins appeared on the porch. Dozens of eyes locked onto them. Dozens of faces tightened, searching for horns, for signs, for anything that would make the fear feel justified. Isaiah and Eliza looked out over them like old souls trapped in small bodies. Price pointed toward the twins. Are those the ones? Whitlow stepped forward, voice loud. Yes, and you will all behave yourselves. They are. The preacher cut him off, shouting, Children of curse. A rock struck the porch railing with a crack. Then another. Then another. Harrow raised his rifle and fired into the air. The shot cracked the afternoon, and birds scattered from the oaks. Enough. Harrow roared. You want blood? Go fight the Yankees. But fear did not listen to reason, and mobs did not obey rank when panic ruled them. A man surged forward and grabbed for Isaiah's rope, trying to yank him down the steps. At that instant, Eliza's body jerked hard, as if her spine had been pulled by invisible hands. Her mouth opened, not to scream, but to speak. The voice that came out was hers and not hers. It was layered. And it said a single name, quietly, clearly, like a bell being struck in a crypt. Gideon. Price went rigid. The crowd stilled as if the word had slapped them. Price's face drained of color. Do not, he whispered, voice barely there. Do not say that. Isaiah turned his head slowly toward him, eyes dark as wet soil. You dug, Isaiah said. But you buried first. Price's mouth opened, no sound coming. His hands shook, stained with mud and bone. The preacher tried to shout again, but the crowd no longer listened to him. They were listening to the twins. Eliza spoke once more, the same layered voice, the same calm certainty. Martha's baby. A woman in the back made a strangled sound and collapsed against her husband. Price staggered backward, eyes wide, and Harrow saw it then, saw the truth hit the man like grape shot. Not superstition. Not rumor. Memory. Price turned and ran. The crowd erupted, half chasing him, half surging toward the porch again, minds splitting between two hungers. Punish the twins or punish the man whose guilt had just been dragged into daylight. Whitlow stood frozen, his plan dissolving in front of him. Lenora grabbed his arm. "Do you see?" she hissed. "This is what you've unleashed." Whitlow's eyes flicked to the twins, two small figures on his porch while his world burned around them. And in that moment, for the first time in his life, Edgar Whitlow understood a truth too large to fit inside ownership. He did not control them. He never had. And the land, finally given a voice, was not finished speaking. The chaos broke Whitlow Plantation open like a rotted fruit. Men chased Gideon Price toward the river, shouting his name as if it were a curse that might still be outrun. Others surged back toward the porch, eyes wild, voices overlapping. Some demanding the twins be silenced, others demanding Whitlow answer for the bones, for the lies, for the years the ground had swallowed screams without complaint. Harrow stood between the crowd and the children, rifle raised now, not in warning but necessity. "Back," he shouted. "All of you. One more step and I fire." No one listened. Fear had divided the crowd into pieces that no longer recognized each other. Neighbors shoved neighbors. A man fell and was trampled. Someone struck a match, the small flame flaring too bright in the afternoon light. Lenora saw it and screamed, "Fire!" The word traveled faster than the flame itself. It took only seconds. A lantern was overturned near the porch. Oil spilled across dry boards that had not seen rain in weeks. The fire leapt greedily, climbing the porch posts, licking at the eaves as if it had been waiting its turn. Whitlow shouted orders no one obeyed. Harrow fired, into the ground this time, then at the porch rail to scatter the men pressing forward. Smoke thickened, harsh and black, stinging eyes and throats. In the confusion, no one noticed Isaiah step backward. No one noticed Eliza slip her bound hands free, the rope falling away like it had never been tied at all. Mara did. She was at the edge of the yard, held back by two women who had grabbed her when the fire started. She wrenched free and ran, skirts in her fists, heart tearing itself apart with every step. "Isaiah," she screamed. "Eliza." The twins turned toward her. They did not look afraid. They looked finished. "It's time," Isaiah said, his voice almost lost in the roar of flame. Eliza nodded. "They heard us." Mara reached them just as the porch roof groaned, beams cracking with the sound of splitting bone. Smoke rolled low, choking. "Come with me," she begged. "Please. Run. Now." Isaiah shook his head gently. "We cannot." Eliza reached out and touched Mara's cheek, her hand warm, solid, real. "You already did." Mara sobbed. "Did what?" "Remembered," Isaiah said. Behind them, Whitlow screamed as a burning beam collapsed, pinning him beneath the edge of the porch. Flames crawled over the white columns of the house, turning wealth and denial into fuel. Lenora tried to reach him, but Harrow caught her, dragging her back as the heat became unbearable. "Edgar," she cried. Whitlow's voice came once, thin, strangled, then was swallowed by smoke. The twins turned toward the yard, toward the tree line, where the land dipped and rose, dark and waiting. "The ground is open," Eliza said. Mara's knees buckled. "You're children," she sobbed. "You're just children." Isaiah looked at her with a softness that broke her. So were they. They stepped off the porch together. Not running. Walking. Straight toward the smoke and the shouting and the heat. And then, where the ground sloped sharply near the old field, where the soil had been turned so many times it barely remembered grass, the twins were gone. Not fallen. Not burned. Gone. Men swore later they had seen the earth ripple, like water disturbed by a dropped stone. Others said smoke swallowed them whole. A few claimed they had simply vanished between heartbeats. No one could agree. The fire consumed the main house by dusk. The roof collapsed inward with a roar that shook the ground. Whitlow Plantation burned until there was nothing left but blackened beams and the smell of ash drifting toward the river. By nightfall, Union artillery thundered faintly in the distance, and the crowd scattered, suddenly remembering the war waiting beyond the trees. Bodies were counted. Caleb Rourke lay cold in the entry hall. Edgar Whitlow was pulled from the ruins long after dark, burned beyond recognition. 2 men were missing from the mob, presumed drowned in the river while chasing Gideon Price. Price himself was never seen again. And the twins? Them children ran, some said. They burned, others insisted. They were never there, a few whispered. Mara searched the edge of the old field until her feet bled and her voice broke. She called their names into the dark until no sound came back to her but frogs and the slow, patient breath of the river. At dawn she stopped, because she could hear them. Not with her ears. With the part of her that had always known this land was listening. She left Whitlow Plantation before the soldiers arrived 2 days later. walked north with nothing but a shawl and memory. No one stopped her. No one wanted to ask questions anymore. The county records listed the twins as missing. Their names were later scratched out entirely when the plantation changed hands under wartime seizure. History closed its book and moved on. But history is careless. It leaves margins. Years later, during Reconstruction, a surveyor mapping the burned land marked a section near the old smokehouse as unstable. The soil sank unexpectedly. Bones surfaced again. Too many to count. Old men in the county refused to walk there after dark. Children swore they heard voices when the ground was wet, not screaming, never screaming, but speaking low and steady as if finishing one another's sentences. And sometimes travelers along the James claimed they saw two figures at the edge of the trees at dusk, standing shoulder to shoulder, watching the river flow past. They never came closer. They never spoke first. But if you said the wrong name in the wrong place, the land remembered, and it answered. In the weeks that followed the fire, Whitlow Plantation ceased to exist in every way that mattered. The Confederacy never sent an investigator. Union troops passed through months later and recorded the ruins as collateral damage of war, nothing more. The deputies who had arrived that afternoon filed vague statements about civil unrest and structural failure. Dr. Whitcomb left the county within a fortnight, his notebooks burned in his hearth before dawn, his practice abandoned without explanation. Lieutenant Harrow returned to his regiment and was killed outside Petersburg the following spring, a bullet through the chest that history found easier to explain. As for Lenora Whitlow, she survived the fire with burns on her hands and a look in her eyes that never softened again. She lived with a cousin in Norfolk until the war ended, then vanished from records as thoroughly as the twins had. Some said she went north. Others said she joined a church that preached silence as salvation. No one could say for certain. Gideon Price was never found. A fisherman claimed he saw a man matching his description walking into the river at dusk 3 days after the fire, coat folded neatly on the bank. Another swore Price rode west under a false name. The county preferred the river story. Rivers closed questions. Mara did not return. She walked until her shoes split, then walked barefoot. She followed the river north, then inland, then north again, working where she could, sleeping where she was allowed, carrying with her a certainty she never spoke aloud. People said she was quiet but not broken, that she listened more than she talked, that sometimes when asked where she came from, she paused too long before answering. She lived long enough to see freedom arrive like a thing both promised and postponed. She lived long enough to understand that freedom did not mean forgetting. And forgetting, she knew, was the most dangerous lie of all. Years passed. The land where Whitlow Plantation had stood was sold, then sold again. Crops failed there more often than not. Fences rotted faster than they should have. Men complained of hearing voices when the ground was wet, low and overlapping, never loud enough to pin to a direction. During Reconstruction, a schoolhouse was proposed for the site. It was never built. Every time workers dug, they found something: bone fragments, buttons, rusted chains, things no ledger had ever accounted for. Eventually, the project was abandoned. The land was left alone, an irregular blank spot on county maps that surveyors learned not to question. In the 1890s, a historian from Richmond attempted to document the fire. He interviewed surviving witnesses, what few there were. Their stories contradicted one another so completely that he abandoned the effort, concluding that hysteria and superstition had overtaken reason. He wrote one sentence in his private journal before closing the book for good: "There are events that refuse to stay dead." The twins were never officially acknowledged. No photographs exist. No birth records survived. Their names, Isaiah and Eliza, appear only once in a church margin, later crossed out by a different hand. To history they were an error corrected. But to the land they were something else. Old people in the county told children not to play near the old field. Not because it was haunted, hauntings implied the past was restless, but because it was awake. They said the ground there listened and that it did not like lies. Sometimes, after heavy rain, footprints appeared where no one had walked. 2 sets, side by side, never leading anywhere. What the twins truly were has been debated in whispers ever since. Some called them a curse born from unpunished cruelty. Others called them a miracle, proof that truth will find a voice no matter how deep it is buried. A few believed they were neither, that they were simply memory given flesh long enough to speak. The truth, like all dangerous truths, resists naming. But this much is certain: after Whitlow Plantation burned, the killing stopped on that land. No new bones were added to the soil. No one dared to use it again for profit or punishment. The ground had been heard, and history for once had been forced to listen. What do you think the twins truly were? A curse, a miracle, or something history refuses to name? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you want more dark historical mysteries like this, stories that blur the line between documented past and buried truth, subscribe to Chronicles of Shadows, hit the notification bell so you never miss a story, and share this video with someone who believes the past is never truly gone. These stories need to be remembered. These voices need to be heard. I'll see you in the next one.